Good morning. I'd like to talk a little bit about what is, I think, a new consideration for cities, which is the skyscape. With major cities throughout the world, it's not just buildings and public spaces that are important now. More than ever, it's the skyscape. And this is the aerial view, or the skyline, as seen from a distance. This is often the postcard image that travelers take away with them, and it's their lasting memory of a city. In the past, when buildings were all low-rise, people assessed cities more in terms of their streetscape, and now we see them from above. With ever more high-rise buildings encroaching on the skyline, we have to consider the overall composition as a serious planning issue. It's a difficult matter to control because most towers are designed as commercial developments, which are dependent on rental values, the price of land, and they're driven by ambition and expectation. Current control legislation relates to plot ratios, rights of light, and infrastructure limitations which set the parameters for height. But it's become obvious for some time that there needs to be a more sophisticated 3D modeling envelope for planners to work to. With both historic and modern cities, there's a need to carefully consider the shape and profile of the skyline. I don't have any scientific data on this, but to explain my thoughts on the subject, I intend to show some examples of cities that I'm familiar with and others that I'm working in as an architect, starting with London. This is a view from Dulwich and Sydenham Golf Club. So it's a view I know quite well when I get the chance to play. But it seems to me that London has a special quality. Obviously, it's a historic city. It dates back 2,000 years. And for most of that time, there were no tall buildings at all. The only tall structures were church towers and spires in a medieval street pattern of narrow and twisting alleyways, mostly made of combustible materials. And much of these were lost in 1666 with the Great Fire of London, which destroyed over 60% of the city. This provided the opportunity for change, and although no major rebuilding plan was ever agreed, Christopher Wren was appointed to design St. Paul's Cathedral, which was to stand high above all other buildings and create a focal point on the skyline, which it retains today. Paintings by Canaletto, and this is one of them, from around 1746, show the prominence of St. Paul's, towering above the surrounding brick buildings, with only the spires of local churches rising above them. This situation remained until the 20th century, when some of the larger buildings started to be constructed, and a process which continued in the 1950s and 60s. And in 1964, the Post Office Tower was the first building to exceed the height of St. Paul's Cathedral. This was soon followed by the NatWest Tower, which was possibly the first skyscraper. But height restrictions in the city led to the development of Canary Wharf in the Docklands, and the completion of One Canada Square in 1991 with a height of 235 really set the benchmark for the city. And since then, there have been two high-rise clusters, one the main part of the city and the other Canary Wharf, and they both continue to develop. But of course, huge changes are taking place in the city, which you can see now with the Rogers Stirk Harbour cheese grater going up at the same time as Vilonis walkie-talkie. all in the central cluster. But Renzo pianos, I'm not sure whether I can see this. Yeah. That was related to the walkie-talkie and the cheese grater. And this was the Renzo piano's shard, which you're probably all going to this evening. At first, I was worried about this being the tallest building outside the cluster, but I've come round to thinking that its peripheral position on the river actually helps and enhances the city's skyline. It gives it a sort of character which wasn't there before and rather unexpected. But I'd still say that London retains its historic core as the main identifiable element of the city. But by contrast, Shanghai, which now has claimed to be the largest city in the world by population, also has a history which goes back 1,000 years. But its character has changed dramatically. Its location on the Yangtze River Delta makes it an important international trading port. Its dramatic skyline, however, only dates back to the 1990s with the development of the Pudong area, which was formerly farmland. Anchored by the rather strange Oriental Pearl Tower, this financial district has attracted extraordinary high-rise development, which will be capped off by a triplet of three spectacular towers. The Jinmao Tower, which was completed in 1999, the Shanghai World Financial Center, completed in 2008, and the Shanghai Tower, which is expected to complete next year. I think this is an amazing triplet of towers, and it changes the whole skyscape of the city, and it really gives a sort of boost to the whole identity of China, really. And this is where I think high-rise really comes into play, and the idea of controlling where the high-rise, the shape and form of the skyline. So we're going to move on now to Hong Kong, which is also an international trading hub. And until fairly recently, well, till 1998, all the development was controlled around the harbour, and it was confined by the aircraft coming from Kai Tak Airport. But of course, when Chek Lap Kok Airport was built, that allowed taller buildings within the centre of the city. And since then, it's really taken off. And I'd say that whilst the majority of the individual buildings are undistinguished, the overall density is impressive. And and at night time, it really comes alive. This is through this spectacular symphony of light, as it's known, which is a multimedia show involving light on the buildings of both sides of the harbour. Coloured lights, laser beams, searchlights, all synchronised to music. And it seems to me that this is what gives Hong Kong part of its sort of essential identity. But my own experience in China relates to Guangzhou, and this is the third city of China, an industrial region, as you know, but it's also known as the Garden City. And when they were contemplating a new CPD, the planners decided to have twin towers coming down to the Pearl River as a sort of gateway. There was a competition held in 2004. In fact, some of you will have noted that I spoke about this at the last conference in Shanghai. And we were lucky enough to win this, but we were only commissioned to build the West Tower, but with the expectation that we would later go on to build the East Tower. But this was delayed. West Tower was completed in 2011. But by that time, the city's ambitions had increased, so that the height of 440 meters wasn't enough for them. They needed something taller. So that was our West Tower. And now this is the proposal for East and West Towers, with an extra 90 meters added to East Tower. It changes the symmetry, but actually I'm happy with it. I think that probably having twin towers of the same height is a little bit too precious. And I think the dreadful tragedy of the World Trade Center rather put paid to that idea of twin towers. And I think this will be accompanied by a series of other tall towers in the same location. And then you start to get the sort of shape of the skyscape that becomes interesting. And I think it will be a great enhancement to the city of Guangzhou. So Christoph talked about Sydney, and this is the city that I'm now working in. And I have to commend him on his very fine building in Bly Street. It's a very sophisticated building in the CPD, which he showed was a very confined and controlled and dense area of development. And this image, as you arrive in Sydney from the airport, shows the skyline. You can see that there are no super towers, but it's still pretty dramatic. And the shape is actually fairly well controlled. And although this wouldn't probably be a postcard image, it is nevertheless interesting and exciting, and you feel that you're drawn to the city from here. So the views of Sydney are always rather dominated by the bridge and the Opera House, which are the two landmarks. And of course here you see the cluster of high-rise buildings behind. They all play their part, and when you get close to them, they have a strong individual identity. But of course, it is the overall form that probably seems the most impressive aspect of it. And you can see here, on the far right is the site of the building that I'm working on, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But through working on this project, examining all these aerial views of the city, this was really what led me to think about the importance of skyscape. You can see here that the city is dominated by water. The harbour really confines development to specific areas, and most of the development is low-rise, which makes the high-rise area all the more important and more impressive. So there are other fine buildings in the city by Renzo, Piano, Norman Foster, as well as Christoph's building. And there are 3 towers currently under construction by Roger Sturck-Harbour at Barangaroo. And these are the 3 buildings on the right. And the building that I'm involved with is on the left. This is the final sort of point of Barangaroo, which is on the northwest corner of the central business district. In Sydney, they have an overall height restriction of 235 metres, with a possibility of going to 250 metres. Of course, everyone wants to go to 250 metres, and we're certainly trying for that, but we don't know whether we'll succeed. But what they have set up is a process of important international competitions to ensure that the tall buildings do make a major contribution to the city. And I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but I'd like to just describe this building a little bit, because the brief was to create a landmark. And as you know, it's not possible to build a landmark to order. In fact, architects can't design landmarks. It's the public that decides whether a building will be a landmark or not. And the only thing that I feel, one of the sort of ways of at least going some in the right direction, is to create something that nobody's ever seen before, something that's completely unique. And in order to do this, I think you have to start from a different position. So when it came to this project, I started to describe in the presentation a narrative of the way that we'd come to the design. And it started actually with a sculpture that I'd been working on some time before on the left, which had 3 petals that twisted and rising up to the sky at different heights. But they were just blades. But it occurred to me that architecturally you could join the tips of the petals together to create a building. And the building would have a twist to it. But we found that a 90-degree or 120-degree twist was too much, so we reduced it on the image on the bottom right down to 60-degree twist, which we could deal with on the form without destroying the structural integrity of the building. And that was the way we developed the design. It started as a series of diagrams, really, and I became very interested in the sculptural forms of the twisting petals. The idea that you can create sort of void spaces. So this building has sort of inherent internal as well as external spaces that you see from the outside. And this was just the very first form-finding exercise, which gradually developed into more of a sculptural form of a building. Still very outline in its element, but it gave me the confidence to feel that one could turn this into a skyscraper. And one of the extra elements was to make the most use of the views of the harbour and the opera house. So the building became very more oriented to the northeast, leaving a sort of a back to the waterfront. And of course one couldn't leave a back to the waterfront, so the back of it has to become very sculptural. And you can begin to get an idea how the structure works with a traditional core with outriggers. And the twist is confined to the external skin of the building. And just looking at the plan of it, you can see that it's quite complex because of the different forms. The petals became slightly more than just 3 petals. One tails off a little bit earlier to form the main hotel element, and the other three rise up to the top of the building, bifurcating right at the top to create a sort of crown to the building. And I leave you with this form, with this view of the form from the waterfront. And you can see here how you're actually seeing the backside of the building, but by creating a sculptural form, it kind of works, I think, as a piece of architecture in its own right, with the main views being on the other side of the building. And I know that's a little bit of a deviation from Skyscape, but in a way, it's the way I saw the Skyscape of Sydney and how I could perhaps make a contribution by defining the northwest corner of the CPD. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.